with Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25. And this morning's verse is text 26, 3:25:26. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And the Sanskrit. Bhaktya pumanjata viraga aindriyad drishta shrutan mad rachanano chintaya chitasya yato grahane yoga yukto yatishyate rishabhir yoga margai. Thus, consciously engaged in devotional service in the association of devotees, a person gains distaste for sense gratification, both in this world and in the next, by constantly thinking about the activities of the Lord. This process of Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of mystic power. When one is actually situated on that path of devotional service, he is able to control the mind. Purport. In all scriptures, people are encouraged to act in a pious way so that they can enjoy sense gratification, not only in this life but also in the next. For example, one is promised promotion to the heavenly kingdom of higher planets by pious fruitive activities, but a devotee in the association of devotees prefers to contemplate the activities of the Lord, how he has created this universe, how he is maintaining it, how the creation dissolves, and how in the spiritual kingdom the Lord's pastimes are going on. There are full literatures describing these activities of the Lord, especially Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Samhita, and Srimad Bhagavatam. The sincere devotee who associates with devotees gets the opportunity to hear and contemplate this subject of the pastimes of the Lord, and the result is that he feels distaste for the so-called happiness in this or that world, in heaven or on other planets. The devotees are simply interested in being transferred to the personal association of the Lord. They have no more attraction for temporary so-called happiness. That is the position of one who is yoga yukta, which is right in the verse. Chitasya yato grahane yoga yukta. One who is fixed in mystic power is not disturbed by the allurement of this world or that world. He is interested in the matters of spiritual understanding or the spiritual situation. The sublime situation is very easily attained by the easiest process, bhakti yoga. Rijubhir yoga margai. A very suitable word used here is rijubhi, or very easy. There are different processes of yoga marga, attaining yoga perfection, but this process, devotional service to the Lord, is the easiest. Not only is it the easiest process, but the result is sublime. Everyone, therefore, should try to take this process of Krishna consciousness and reach the highest perfection of life. regardless of the caliber of the audience that Prabhupada was addressing, there's always a theme, and that's cleansing and uplifting, detachment and knowledge, yukta vairagya, always. And similarly, the Bhagavatam. Just a little appreciation along that line. The second book that Srila Prabhupada composed, the first book that Srila Prabhupada composed was Easy Journey to Other Planets. Just this morning, I was listening to an interview with Srila Prabhupada by the Los Angeles Times. And apparently, at this particular juncture, Prabhupada was making one of his bold assertions: they didn't go to the moon. So the LA Times wanted to get the scoop. What did he mean when he said that they couldn't have landed on the moon? It's like a whole... He kept asking the same question 6 different ways. So the easy journey to other planets was not just part of my understanding, part of what Prabhupada was doing was shaking the foundation of blind faith in the scientist says X. So X has to be true because the scientist said it. And extend that to anything and everything. So because it was a big deal in 1960, when space exploration started and people were trying to get to the moon, he wrote Easy Journey to Other Planets. You don't have to go through all that rigmarole. Why do people want to go to the moon anyways? Knowledge, and expand knowledge, explore, etc., 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 etc. The unknown, learn about the unknown. And so that's, part of the buzz for a scientist. Genuinely, they want to explore the unknown and find different ways to explore the unknown. So, piggybacking on that space exploration, he wrote his first book. Easy. Not only you can land there, but then you can reside there, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, by Vedic process. So that there is information, now back to this purport, where higher destinations can be achieved. And we discussed it yesterday evening, a vast part of the Vedas is karmakanda. Sometimes it's said 90%, particularly in the 4 Vedas portion, Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Veda. It's procedures for doing yagyas and rituals whereby one gains pious merit, and with that pious merit one can go to the heavenly planets and reside there for a long time. And part of what Prabhupada was saying to this reporter was, it wasn't intimidating, it's just letting him know that the paltry perspective of what your senses can perceive, there's a much, much, much greater reality than what the senses can perceive. And he gave some worldly examples, but it was very sensible. I mean, a worldly example he gave was in primitive times, there was an idea in some places that when the sun set, the sun died. And the next morning, the sun took birth again. And then, as understandings evolved, it wasn't that the sun died, the sun set, and somewhere else the sun is rising as the sun is setting here. And so understanding started to expand. And as that understanding started to expand by evolution of knowledge, there's also a spiritual science that says all kinds of things. Like, what's the credential that you need in order to enter the moon planet? Is it unreasonable that when you want to come to America, you have to have a visa, a passport, and go through immigration, otherwise you can't enter? Is it unreasonable? And so similarly in higher realms, and so on and so on and so on. So one of the instruments that Prabhupada would use is something that's known and helping people take a look at something that's yet unknown through the lens of higher knowledge of the Vedas. So he was resting his position on what the Vedas say, and according to the Vedas, you don't have the adhikar, the eligibility, the quality. So you can try busting your way into America, and people do it, but it's unlawful. Anyway, so the second book that he wrote after his Easy Journey to Other Planets was for people of a conference, a symposium or a conference, convention in Japan. So for the Japanese, so it was something, culture of the human spirit. Anyway, so he wrote something that he thought would be suitable to that audience, which is appreciating truths of life from scenes of nature. Because it's true, Eastern people, Far Eastern people, have a cultural tendency within their experience of nature to understand deeper truths of life. It's part of the culture. So he took that cultural aspect and took Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 20 of Canto 10. It's just scenes of the rainy season and the autumn season that follows the rainy season. And he taught Srimad Bhagavatam. A methodology of being relatable to an audience but unchanging truths through the medium of what's relatable to the audience. So similarly here, Prabhupada is writing Srimad Bhagavatam, commentary to Srimad Bhagavatam, for the world that doesn't know. That's a thing they don't know. They don't know the science of the soul, and they don't know, the extensions of the science of the soul. So that's his audience. And he is indicating the people that do have some sense, certainly within Vedic culture, but beyond Vedic culture, some sense that theism or spirituality or religious life is meant for A and B. Living piously in this life and going to the better realm after this life, namely heaven. It's not a new idea. It's not, exclusive to this part of the world or this religion or that culture. It's universal. So it's built within his purport. Generally speaking, that's what people think. And it's true. It's true. Go to heaven. What's heaven? Try it sometime. Ask somebody that's not from a Vaishnava tradition, and ask them, what's heaven like? What do you do there? Try it. I did it when I was a kid. I asked mom and dad, what's it like there? I asked the priest. It's nice. Okay. Describe some of the travel advertisement, please. What's the marketing for that place? You're supposed to want to go there. What is it? What's it like? And that's heaven, what to speak of beyond. So Prabhupada had an audience that had an idea that there's a better place than this place, and piety is the way to get to that better place. And what's beyond that better place, what's in that place and what to speak of beyond. And note some vague. So, therefore, he is helping that audience. He's being relevant and relatable to that audience, and we should also keep that in mind, whoever our audiences are. At the same time, the universal principle, that the message, let go of the limited and reach for the unlimited. And bhakti is that, so this is the whole section on bhakti. This from verse 20 to verse 27, which is the final verse of this section. It's an astakam, it's 8 verses where Kapila Dev is teaching about Sadhu Sanga as the means to get to the perfection of life. So people don't know. They don't know. Listen to Prabhupada's recorded lectures. Na te vidu svarta katimi Vishnu. Prahlad Maharaj to his father. Na te vidu. They don't know. Sva artha. Their self-interest is Vishnu. They don't know. So the audience that doesn't know, Prabhupada is, and of course Bhagavatam is helping people that don't know to at least have an understanding, and then there's the science of that understanding and how you implement or live a life of that understanding. And that's, that's what we're supposed to get from the Bhagavatam and the importance of Sadhu Sanga. So in this series of 8 verses, there's the outcome. There's the principle, there's identifying who's a sadhu, there's the activities you do with the sadhu, there's things that you feel and experience, and then there's the mature fruit. So the mature fruit takes one beyond ignorance, or not knowing who I am and not knowing what the abode of the Supreme Person is, who is the Supreme, because described earlier is hearing topics about the Supreme Person. So it's the same principle as we were discussing in Madhurya Kandamani. It's the same principle as in Bhagavad Gita, Manmana, or Mamanusmara Yudhyatya. Always remember Krishna. So that's the fruit, always remembering Krishna, is the fruit of hearing about Krishna from sadhus and doing sadhu-like activity. That's the bhajana kriya part with sadhus, following the path of the sadhus. And by doing that, there's 2 things, the cleansing and the awakening. What's being emphasized here in the purport is one's no longer being attracted by the promise of happiness in this or the next life. Next life meaning heavenly pleasures, heavenly, and whatever that is, it's not so clear. At least most people, it's not clear what is heaven like. So, but it's a promise. You get an upgrade. So many people, fruitive workers in the karma field, they do something to get something, and they're always, whatever that something is, they want something more. So you keep climbing the social ladder, corporate ladder, and more, or better. And more is better, and better is more. So it's just, that's fruitive consciousness. And what's life like without fruitive consciousness? What's the inspiration, motivation? It's natural. Conditioned tendencies is naturally to apply the same yardsticks to bhakti. But it's, one has to let go of those yardsticks because that's not the measure. And is it attainable? It's attainable. And how does it work? It works by sound vibration and with oral reception, hearing the sound vibration, and in this way, awakening that attraction. And so that's what this verse is saying. Text 26. Thus, consciously engaged in devotional service in the association of devotees, a person gains distaste for sense gratification, both in this world and in the next, by constantly thinking of the activities of the Lord. So that's in the activities of bhakti. There's 9 activities of bhakti. The third one is Vishnu Smaranam, Shravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. That's the first 3. So the emphasis with Sadhu Sanga is Shravanam Kirtanam, but then comes Vishnu Smaranam. Just a little sharing. Before coming here, before coming to Portland, I was with a group of devotees in Naperville, the suburb of Chicago, and we had a festival of the Holy Name. And there were two sections in that festival of the Holy Name where writings of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur were presented. Very nice. You know, both of them were in the form of letters, but he was giving teachings through his letters on what is the process of chanting. Very nice. And both of these letters, they start differently and they end the same place. In both of those letters, Bhaktisiddhanta emphasized, I sent you one of the documents, so the importance of hearing. Specifically, hearing with the spiritual ear. What does that mean? There's the material ear, and we hear sounds. I mean, aside from, this amplification system, if I stop talking, you can hear the fan in the kitchen. When you rang the bell, we could hear the bell. There's material sounds that the physical ear can hear. And then when there's a procedure, sound or the senses send information to the mind, and the mind gathers that information. It's the repository of the senses, or it's said to be the sixth sense, the king, or the ruler of the five senses, five knowledge-acquiring senses. And the impression is made in the mind. And then, this is Sankhya. And then the intelligence assesses, what was that? And we may think it's something else, but sure enough, when you rang the bell, it meant somebody's at the door. And so then behaviors follow the sound based upon, the intelligence, the mind, and the senses. And that's with material sound. So spiritual sound can and is meant to go one step further. Even if it doesn't, even if we're inattentive and don't acquire intelligence given to us by Krishna, still the spiritual sound acts spiritually beyond physical, mental, and intellectual. And if one hears with the spiritual ear, that means the soul, the coverings of the soul become gradually effaced or minimized, reduced, and then one can start, if possible, one can start to hear on the platform of the soul or with the spiritual ear, or in the Sanskrit terminology is para. Para sound can be heard para by the supreme entity within the body, the soul, and the supreme soul. So he explains, so my point is, this is getting back to this remembrance of the activities of the Lord. He says in both of these articles, or letters, there's no need, extraneous need, for remembrance of the activities of the Lord. Rather, that comes naturally. You do the first two nicely, it comes naturally. Now, it doesn't mean then when that stage of naturally comes, that there's no energy invested in remembrance. The point he makes is, it's not, do the first two first, nicely, and then the inspiration impetus for Vishnu Smaranam, or constantly thinking about the activities of the Lord, become a natural consequence. Not automatic, as we discussed yesterday, but a natural consequence. And so then the remembrance, constant remembrance of the activities of the Lord begins. So from our Madhurya Kadambini class, it's intermittent or Ganatarala. Sometimes not, sometimes not. The sometimes is nice. The sometimes nice is just part of the path, the trajectory to get to constant. So when I was discussing that in Naperville during the Festival of Holy Name, somebody said, what you just read that Bhaktisiddhanta said is different than what Hari Parshad Prabhu said when he visited here. And I mentioned this to Parmakru, and he said, yes, you said the same thing here in Portland. And that is the metaphor, he has, at least in Naperville, a tripod example. Hearing, chanting, and remembering. And they're both to be cultivated. So it's not Bhaktisiddhanta's statements cancel out Hari Parshad Prabhu's statements. If this is right, then that has to be wrong. Rather, there's a sequence. And if you want to get to the third leg of the tripod, please engage in the hearing and chanting nicely, because it will, the inspiration and tendency, what to speak of constant, cultivation, will follow. Say it again. Don't focus. Bhaktisiddhanta's words. There's no need for some additional, or one might even say artificial, exercise, because it was present during his time. So he was speaking against that which is present during his time. And in the Vaishnava world, it's a practice that sometimes happens. Ashtakaliya Leela. It's right there in the document I sent you. What's that? Ashtakaliya Leela. Remembrance of Krishna's pastimes during the eightfold parts of the day. You take the 24 hours and divide 8 into 24, and there's 3-hour segments. And Ashtakaliya Leela is a meditation on the activities of Krishna during the 8 times of the day. And it's a practice for those who have become proficient in hearing and chanting, especially hearing, because that's where the cleansing and awakening takes place, hearing with the spiritual ear. So all of that is, just diving more deeply into what this verse is saying. And in fact, that's like the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is like an ocean that that has no bottom. Even oceans, vast oceans, they have a bottom. And the ocean of spiritual truth has no bottom. It's a nice ocean. And it's an ocean of bhakti rasa, right? of the mellows of the happiness and joy and everything else that's in that relationship with Krishna, which is the loving service unto Krishna. There's no limit. So you take a verse and just dive deeper. And this is the Vedic process. You go deeper, and you go deeper, and you go deeper, and there's no limit. Then come back up for air. Because you have your worldly activities to do. But a cultivation of bhakti, the association with sadhu or Sadhu Sanga, leads one to that ocean of bhakti where in mature stage there's what it says here. Constantly thinking about the activities of the Lord. This process of Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of mystic power. The mystic power word is Prabhupada's rendering of the last part of this shloka, yoga margai. Yoga margai is grammatical, so yoga marga, the path of yoga. And the path of yoga is mystical. Like how do you go from where we are to Vaikuntha or Goloka or the spiritual realm. There's this question in the Bhagavatam: how can the ear, which is material, and the tongue, which is material, get one to a spiritual place? It's a good question. How do you get from here to the spiritual realm? And it's mystical, but it has some fundamental understandings in principle. And in principle, the ear and the tongue and everything comes from one source. And the one source is all spiritual. And you connect those things that come from the all spiritual source to the source through the mystical process of yoga, or the best of the yoga systems is bhakti yoga. And then it's a mystical process. And mystically, but there's a spiritual science to the mystically. One can experience things that are otherworldly. And it's through the medium of spiritual sound. Broadcast from the proper source. Ultimately, the source is the Supreme Person, but then transmitted from the Supreme Person properly, or through disciplic succession, undistorted. And heard with an ear that's not just hearing material sound, but purified and coming to the point of hearing spiritual sound and recognizing this sound is not different than the Supreme Lord. The Vedas are not different than the Supreme Lord. I discussed this a little bit during the Festival Holy Name. I'll just share a little bit because it's interesting. The very first presentation was based upon a nice lecture that I heard a YouTube recording of by Bhanu Swami, and the title of the lecture he gave at the Chaupati Temple was Mysteries of Sound. And you can find it on a YouTube channel, Mysteries of Sound, Bhanu Swami. So one of the things that he described is, what's sound? Sound is created by vibration. And there's different magnitudes, and there's different vibrations or frequencies of vibration that create different sounds. Different sounds are created by different frequencies of vibration. So you get this sound and that sound. And it's not only like material sound, but then there's subtle sound. For example, through instrumentation, advancement of material science or instruments of science, they can measure brain waves. So subtle also vibrates. And there are, within the mind or states of consciousness, there are different vibrations. For example, vibrations when you're asleep, vibrations when you're awake, vibrations when there's the parasympathetic nervous system is acute, the fight or flight, and different thoughts within those states can also be measured. So there's a way that by using modern technology, one can read one's thoughts. And then another feature is that sound has form. So the form of our thought takes its shape in the form of our activity, like the bell rings, and then there's a behavior that follows it. Form, it's a nice science. Now, can yogis read one's thoughts? Yes. It's a science. Is it fiction, or is it fact? It's fact. So they have, some yogis have the capacity to read one's thoughts. And how do they do it? Frequencies, and because they have developed that skill, that the frequencies are understood, and thus the thoughts are understood, even without you having to speak the thought. People can read somebody's mind. That happens even not yogis. Some people have that capacity, clairvoyance. But yogis, some yogis. So, getting back, so as with material, so also spiritual. So, supposing one's thoughts become spiritual by the process of Sadhu Sanga, and from sadhus hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, and our receiver is on, and there's cleansing of the coverings, and then one can start to hear the spiritual sound with a spiritual ear. And then something happens. It's joyful. And when that joyfulness is there, there's not an attraction for the material sound, or it subsides and dissipates. And that's spiritual life. That's a consequence of Sadhu Sanga. It takes some time. It takes some very serious, sincere practice. But that's where the train is going. Get on board. Because that's where the train is going. And that's why I selected this section. Nice section. The importance of Sadhu Sanga, and what's the outcome. This verse is describing that outcome. Last sentence. When one is actually situated on that path, yoga margai, of devotional service, he is able to control the mind. Whew, what a relief. Control the mind means the spiritual mind. The material mind, Prakriti has three modes. And the modes keep changing, and they're competing for supremacy. And the material mind is not going to become controlled. It can be subdued. But as time passes, the predominance of the modes will change with the movement of time, and then the mind becomes agitated. So the mind-controlled means a spiritual mind. And how do you spiritualize the mind? Bhakti. How does bhakti process work? Sadhu Sanga, bhajana kriya, anartha vritti, nishtha, etc. So, there's one more verse, and we're not going to cover it during this visit. Maybe another time. It's a nice verse, but it's the conclusion of this section. And Kapila Dev, let's go back to where we started. Kapila Dev, the whole chapter, 25, is Kapila Dev's response to his mother, who wants to know, how am I going to maintain my Krishna consciousness, my rightfully received situation by the association with Kardama Muni, because Kardama Muni was pure devotee. And through his association and her service unto him, she had acquired qualities like his qualities. But he's now gone. So when those persons, it's important, when those persons who are the very source of your spiritual elevation are no longer physically available, and that time is going to come when those luminaries that are the sources of sound vibration for us during our present lifespan, their physical presence is going to be gone. Now, then what? That's her question. So it's a good question. And it's good to know what the answer is, because the time is going to come for each of us. So how do you access Sadhu Sanga when the sadhu is no longer physically present? Good question. Through sound. So there's recorded sound in different technologies. But that association can be accessed through sound. Just like we're doing. It's Srimad Bhagavatam. It's Shukadeva Goswami narrating, but he's narrating the talk between Kapila and Devahuti. And it's spiritual sound. So connect with those who are on that path, the Yoga Margai, who relish hearing and chanting these spiritual sounds. And then you get it. That's Sadhu Sanga. Even in the physical absence of those luminaries that are, most important to you presently in the source of spiritual sound. Gain as much as you can while they're available, and when they're absent, hear the same. Any discussion?
Krishna Maharaj. We hear sometimes that association should be sajatiya. How is that connected to? I just want to understand reconcile and understand how they are related, or what that instruction means.
What's the word? Association should be what?
Sajati, like-minded.
Okay. There are different things to say about that. The reality is there's diversity in this world. No two entities, people or other than people, animals and birds and stuff. The birds of a feather flock together, the saying is, so that's the like-minded. But somebody that likes scripture, somebody likes kirtan, somebody likes festivals, somebody likes, and associate with the like-minded persons, because there's harmony, and you can learn and become inspired by those who have a particular expertise in this or that or the other area of any one of those things that their like-mindedness is. And even amongst the like-minded, there's diversity. What to speak of broad in the picture. And so, for example, because it was just participating in this festival of Holy Name, and I mentioned Shyamsundar came from Houston, and he was a co-presenter. And he just this morning, he starts his japa class at 2:30 Central Time, which kind of rules out West Coast people from being there when it starts. But he sent me the text that he received just this morning from multiple people appreciating what he's doing. So that's like-minded. Persons that want to go more deeply with chanting of the holy name, and they have now found somebody who inspires them, and so it's a gathering of like-minded persons doing similar thing. And then those people on that call, there's this, that, and the other kind of personality, so there's diversity even with the like-mindedness. That's my point. But then it's not that those people that join the like-mindedness japa call are not also tuning into something else and finding like-mindedness with another group that have diverse interests, some deity worship, some something. So my point here is unity in diversity. So the like-mindedness is the unity, and there's diversity, and like-mindedness shouldn't be our thing is better than the other's thing. That's the judgmentalism topic that came up a couple times. It's recognizing there's a disposition towards, and then there can be different, for example, different persons have different japa seminars, and they conduct it differently. Certainly that goes on. Emphasis of this, and emphasis of that, and emphasis of something else. But the center is the same because it's absorption in the holy name. Or different persons that teach Bhakti Shastri. And some will teach this way, some will teach that way, so different methodologies. And that's good. And it's natural. Well, so there's like-mindedness, but then there's diversity. And so forth. So that's its place. My emphasis is respecting others with different like-mindedness than mine, and I'm naturally attracted to those that have like-mindedness, and even different flavors amongst the like-mindedness. But at the same time, not disrespecting or forming groups. The groupism thing is unwholesome. So the unity amongst the diversity is wholesome. Something else?
Hare Krishna. This is from Amara Mataji. I think it's related to the voice. I can take care of that.
Okay.
This is from Shrujana Mataji. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. How different is physical association from spiritual sound? Are they always and exactly same?
I don't understand the question. I mean, I think I understand the question, but I'm not sure I understand the question. In other words, is sitting in a lecture and hearing Srila Prabhupada speak the same as hearing a recording of Srila Prabhupada speaking that same lecture later? Decades later. Is it the same? Is that what the question is? Recorded sound and physical presence sound? Whoever sent the question, clarify what your question is. I want to hear what your question is so I can respond to your question. Did I hit it? Is that what the question is? We'll wait till she sends a text in. Anything else? Yes. Pass the microphone back.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Guru Maharaj. So this Manushyanam Sahasreshu, like, even out of thousands and thousands of men, only a few become inclined to spiritual life, and even amongst those, only a very rare person can understand Krishna. So the whole Krishna conscious process is based on faith, but it's like it's on a very high ramp. Like sometimes it's like I feel lost because...
Well, it's based on faith, which is to qualify. There's divisions of faith, the whole chapter in Bhagavad Gita. So it's resting upon, but then how does that faith get nourished? It has to do with sound. Or from Sadhu Sanga, it's sound. And then faith becomes nourished. Supposing my faith is over there, someone else is over there. So be consistent with the source of sound. And then faith will grow or move in the direction of the sound. If one's faith doesn't move in the direction of the sound, then one checks out. I want something that matches my predisposition of faith. So, you get confused. Now we're going back. You get confused because?
It's like, I think I always want some reciprocation, let's say from Krishna to make me more fulfilled or make me go forward. But I feel like Krishna reciprocates only when at his will, and it's not like talking to a devotee or talking to father or like.
He's a transcendental autocrat.
So it's not.
That's Bhaktisiddhanta's language, by the way.
So it's not like every day Krishna is.
Why not every day? And it's his reciprocation with you is not on your terms. This is an important lesson. You've heard me say this before. Here we go again. Surrender is a prerequisite. Tadviti pranipatena. It's a prerequisite. Pranipat, submission. Now, unto Krishna, and it's when we surrender to Krishna, it's on his terms, not our terms. Supposing you think it's on your terms. Sorry. Is Krishna reciprocating in a different way? Yes. And it doesn't register on your meter that this is on my terms. It should be like this.
So, like
his reciprocation comes in many ways, and it's always there because by nature he's kind. Just like, came along with you came your son. And your son may have an expectation. Dad's reciprocation should look like this. And sometimes it's not like this. But dad isn't thinking, I don't care. Today I don't feel like reciprocating with you. I'm checking out. See you later. Check back in with me when I want you. That's not a loving father. I mean, some people are like that, but it's not a loving father. And Krishna's a loving master, and we're serving him. And how he reciprocates is on his terms.
But like I am a little foolish to.
Well, that's you. But acknowledge that he's not. Your son may be not understanding when you. It's right in Madhurya Kandambani. He gives the example. Sometimes a father may give his son sweet milk. Sometimes a father may give his son something bitter. It's not that when he gives sweet milk, that's nice, and when he gives something bitter, it's not nice. Or it may be like, I don't see anything happening between me and my father. But it's not, the relationship is broken or it doesn't exist. Or, you're a limited person, you may get distracted. But Krishna's not a limited person. So, once again, proportionate to our submission, we will experience. Supposing it's meager, which is what you're saying. And therefore I don't feel because I'm in this meager zone. That's okay. From Krishna's perspective. He's not going to force you to be more than meager. He'll reciprocate according to your submission. So if you want more of a tingling sensation about Krishna's reciprocation, ramp up your submission. Not put your arms across your chest and say, my terms. Don't do that. That's the meagerness position. And so you get accordingly. And it feels like you call out and there's no echo even. It's not registering with Krishna. He's registering. Krishna knows your submission, and he's reciprocating accordingly. Always. Even for the fallen souls that don't look to him at all. He's maintaining them. His kindness is universal. Our experience of that kindness is on his terms and proportionate to our submission. That's reality. That's spiritual reality. Did we have an answer from this person? Bring the microphone up here.
Yes, the Mataji said yes and added a clarification comment.
Okay.
Is association with Srila Prabhupada the same like associating through lectures and books? Is it same and always same?
Well, yes and no. In principle, yes. And there's something very special about sitting at Prabhupada's lotus feet and seeing him and hearing the sound vibration as he's speaking live. Those persons, for example, those persons that had his association, and not just in class, but other ways of being in his association, they were blessed. And they received it in different ways at different times, etc. But that's a very, 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 that's three varies. Special Sangha. And it's special. You can't negate, you can't discard the special. Is it the same? Spiritually speaking, it's the same. And on a personal level, it's very special. So, in other words, two other words. When you hear recorded lectures of Srila Prabhupada, or when I hear recorded lectures of Srila Prabhupada, I'm his disciple, and you hear, and you're not his direct disciple, but you hear, and you're getting you're getting his association, or through his books. I'll live forever in my books. It's true. Now, back to your question. Is that the same of being in a morning walk and hearing a recording of a morning walk conversation, or sitting at Prabhupada's feet and hearing him give class? And the whole vibrational experience of pure bhakti as he's emanating and lifting his audience. And he had it recorded because not everyone can be physically present. So we certainly can get his association through books and recordings. And there's something special about being in his physical presence, hearing. There's my answer to your question. Anything else? Yes?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. You mentioned about subtle sound where thoughts can be measured. As an individual, I'll be able to measure my thoughts, what is good and what is bad. And in line with that, especially when we chant, the lowest is inattentive chanting is the lowest. I know whether I'm doing a qualitative chanting or inattentive chanting. And chanting is a continuous process for us to associate with God. So what is the highest point where I can see that in terms of chanting, what is the peak point of the quality?
Krishna Prema. And what is Krishna Prema? What is the qualities of Krishna Prema? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu exhibited, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught, his followers expanded on those teachings. When we get to the final chapter, Madhurya Kandamati, that's the peak. And then there's stages before the peak. And that peak of prema is going to have diversity. Not only according to rasa, but even according to intensity within a particular rasa. And then within that particular rasa, at its peak, there's also diversity, just like it's endlessly diverse and unfathomable. But so, in that, one of the places you can go to read what is it like at the topmost stage, it's in the final chapter of Madhurya Kandamani. Or in Rupa Goswami's writings, he describes those stages. And when you get to Prema Bhakti, it's described. Or in Jiva Goswami, who made commentary, it's in his commentary on those sections. Or in Jiva Goswami's Priti Sandarbha, it's detailed and detailed. So the short is, there's only one thing and there's nothing else. In the various rasas or moods of love for Krishna, and then there's diversity. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.